Hey, welcome back to Behind the Label. We're doing our Bourbon 101, where we kind of delve into the more geeky, I guess, finer points of what's behind bourbon.
Don't you cross your heart unless you hope to die. Drinking dark whiskey, tell me my life.
I know, we've done a few different things. What have we done so far? Like finishing, we did char levels.
Char levels, different proofs. What else did we do?
We've done like 6 or 7 of them so far. But I know now we're actually going into the grains.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of delve into the actual, what goes into making the ingredients into bourbons.
And so usually you think we start out with corn, but we're going to start out with
some rye.
Rye not.
Well, rye not.
So secondary grain in a bourbon could be great in a whiskey, where it's the main grain, but
could be the only grain.
Could be the only grain. Sure can. So I mean, the percentage of this in a whiskey makes a big difference in the flavor of whiskey.
Sure.
So we're talking about rye, which is considered a small grain. If you look at it compared to corn, a lot harder to distill.
When you say small grain, you're talking about the actual physical size of the kernel.
Yes.
Yeah. So rye is on average about like a rice, about like a grain of rice on there.
It is. You can malt this if you want. Like a malted barley.
Now, for those out there that may not know what malted means,
tell us what malted is, Mr.
So
Scientist.
when you hear things called like a malt or malted grain, most of the time you hear that in association with barley, another different grain. But you can essentially malt any cereal, what's called a cereal grain, and cereal. It's not just like cornflakes, although that's where it comes from. Anything that's called a cereal grain is essentially a grass. That's all it is. It's a top species of grass that we can eat essentially the seeds from. So inside each seed is an enzyme called amylase, and that amylase is responsible for essentially breaking down the starch that's within seeds, so that when the seed falls off the plant into the ground, it gets wet. That activates the enzyme. That enzyme then cuts the starch that's in that seed, cuts it into simple sugars, so that the seed can then essentially feed the new plant that's going to come up off that. So it's kind of like akin to an egg yolk. You can almost think of it in that way. It's kind of food. It's food for the new plant.
So when we malt something, we don't drop it on the ground.
Right, we don't drop it on the ground, but we do get it wet. So essentially what happens is you basically trick the seeds into thinking it's in the ground, getting wet. So you get it wet, there's a process you go through a couple times, you get it wet, you let it breathe, and you get it wet again. What you really want to do is stimulate that seed then to germinate, or to basically start germinating. But once it starts germinating, then you stop that process, because you don't want it to use up all its amylase and starch. You want to essentially freeze that process, and you do that by drying it. But it's pretty temperature dependent. You don't want to over dry it, because then you kill the amylase, you kill the activity of that. If you under dry it, you actually take on molds. You get a risk of getting molds and all flavors with there. So once that has been germinated, that's then called malt, and that malt can be malted rye, malted barley, malted corn. But typically, when you hear malt, it's barley, just like we talked about before on that other one.
So what does barley use most of the time?
The reason barley is mostly used as the malt is because of what's called diastatic power. Essentially, how much and how powerful the enzyme is, the amylase enzyme. Barley has about 20 times per weight of seed the power of any of the rest of them. So, for instance, you could take 95% corn and 5% barley, and that 5% barley has enough amylase to chew up all that corn and make sugars out of it. Not that the rest of them can't, but you just don't get as much sugar production out of any grains except for barley. Barley for
so you're talking about kind of a yield.
Yeah, yield. And it's actually a fluke of nature. It's a genetic variation that probably started out as a mistake and just kind of was kept through the millennia, and now we use it to our advantage. So there's really no other reason for it to have that much power, because it has way more power than it needs to essentially chew up its own starch. But we take advantage of that and use it. So barley's been around, actually one of the oldest grains that we know about being used by humans. There's undisputed evidence that's been used back for at least 13,000 years. There's a place in Syria, northern Syria, that they've actually gotten seeds from barley that they can prove that humans used.
Now rye's been around in the United States.
I say barley, I meant rye. That's what I meant to say. Rye is one of the oldest ones for 13,000 years. Yeah, and then it's actually one of the first ones that was ever used for whiskey in the U.S.
It was. I mean, you're talking about early on.
Early on.
1600s. They've got
Yeah.
New Amsterdam.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Or even New York. That was
Yeah.
so. And typically in the north, that's another point. Is typically the northeast is where you saw most of the rye, just because it grew better there. A little
Pennsylvania,
colder climate.
Maryland.
Pennsylvania was the big one.
Yeah.
So when you think about, you always hear the term or the phrase that bourbon is our native spirit, and it is. But rye whiskey is also one of our native
Because
spirits.
it was the Irish and the Scottish that came over here and they knew barley.
Right.
But barley didn't grow well here.
Right.
So just
But rye-
for the
rye
same
did.
reason that we switched to corn in Kentucky because rye didn't grow so well.
Right.
They switched to rye because barley didn't grow so well.
Exactly. But the earliest references to whiskey making in the U.S. was most likely rye whiskey, or in fact, it was rye whiskey. Historical things like the Whiskey Rebellion revolved around them taxing rye
They were
whiskey.
born into Pennsylvania.
Yep, they were taxing rye whiskey. George Washington was actually a pretty big distiller in his day.
He was.
It was all
And
rye.
they're making
all
rye whiskey at his distillery
yeah,
now.
they actually have revamped that. So
Yeah.
apparently it was pretty good. He had some pretty
Yeah.
good high reviews of his rye whiskey.
Yeah.
So rye's been around for a while. Rye for a long time. Rye whiskey's been around. That you're talking about probably the mid 1600s. It got really prominent probably in the 1750 to 1790 era. Once bourbon kind of kicked in, I think 1783 is when they quote that.
Yeah, that's
Their
if you're
first-
in Louisville, yes. It
Depending on where
depends.
you are,
It
yeah.
depends on where you're at. You're talking about they were making, it wasn't aged, but it was whiskey, almost like a corn whiskey.
More like a corn whiskey.
Yeah, back in the late 1780s. I mean, there's no really, the first mention of actual charred, containers with bourbon in them was in 1820s. So I mean, it probably was before then that they went into a container, but it was first mentioned.
First mention.
Yes.
So that still gives us probably a good 150 years,
150 years.
Of American whiskey making that was basically just rye whiskey. And so they would use essentially rye and either 100% rye or mix the rye, like you said, in with a little bit of barley if they could get, if it helped it.
You know the major difference between the Pennsylvania and Maryland rye back in the day?
I don't.
Most of Pennsylvania rye was a straight rye that was 100% rye whiskey. Maryland rye was something that was a little over 50% with other grains. A lot of times they had additives to it. I mean, back in the day, had rectifiers that were promoted in that back in the day. So, I mean, today, as it kind of got, everything got regulated, it moved to where, like I said, pretty much Pennsylvania Monongahela style rye was 100% rye, usually a straight rye whiskey. And Maryland rye was something, it didn't have the additives then, but it was still something that was more than 50% rye, but it had other grains in it. So that was the two major differences between the two main ryes of the day back in the day.
Now, when you said straight rye whiskey, do you mean 100% rye or straight is in the term?
At least 2 years old.
So it's 2 years
Yeah.
old. Okay.
100% rye though.
100% rye.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was actual, whiskey that was actual whiskey, not necessarily stuff added to it back in the day. But Maryland rye, grew into something that was not 100% rye, but a whiskey that was actual whiskey, nothing added to it. So that was the two most popular, old Overhort and Rittenhouse ryes. There were quite a few different ryes back in the day.
And these were like commercially sold ryes. These weren't just farm.
Yes.
These weren't,
Started out as farm.
It kind of started
back in
out as a farm kind of private
yeah.
thing, but then actually become a commercial success.
Yeah, when you're
with
getting
just
into the
ryes.
1800s, you're talking about more commercial. Now before that, it was pretty much farm, but more commercial. And it was that way until Prohibition.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was reading. And apparently after Prohibition, well, of course that killed out bourbon and rye, but then bourbon was the only one that kind of kicked back after
Came
that.
back. And rye was
just
kind of
recently is kind
in the
of
2000s, yes.
yeah, it's like the last 10 years or
Yeah.
10 or 15 years is not kind of
Has
kicked back.
making a comeback, yeah. Whereas rye, started in maybe the mid 1980s, making a comeback when Blanton's came out and, Booker came out with his small batch, so you had single barrel small batches, kind of premium bourbons. It took another 20
Yeah, I
years
think people
longer.
are just starting to kind of kick back into it. In fact, a lot of the kind of famous drinks that you hear that were pre-prohibition, like the Manhattans and Old Fashions and stuff, the original recipes were with rye.
And they're better with rye.
And that's what I've heard.
Yes.
But now when you order one, they'll almost invariably make them with bourbon.
Yeah, but I ask for a rye.
Oh, so you'd actually.
I do
you'd
ask for a
actually
rye.
do
It's
that.
better in certain ones. Manhattan, Old Fashions, I think it's better.
Well, that was the original recipe. For that. A couple more things about just the interesting about rye, not necessarily rye itself, but one of the historical things to do with rye is people throughout history, actually there's quite a bit of theories and 2 or 3 books out now that the fungus that infects rye is responsible for a lot of our artistic endeavors, a lot of our writings, and also for like the witch hunts. So there's a fungus that's it will infect any cereal grain that's partial to rye if rye gets too wet. It's called Claviceps purpura, and it basically makes
Say it 10 times fast.
yeah, Claviceps purpura. So it makes a poison, a toxin that comes off that's called ergot.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever heard of there's a medicine now called ergotamine. It's used for migraine headaches, and it works on the principle of ergot basically causes vasoconstriction, cuts off blood supply if you get too much. But people back then, it's really hard to kind of tell if your rye was infected. They would make bread out of it. They'd eat the bread, and you would have literally whole towns that people thought were like the devil that came down and like possessed these whole towns stuff because people were hallucinating and going into spasms and convulsions and saying, like, speaking in weird tongues, causes all kinds of hallucinations and stuff. And so it's been responsible for quite a bit. And there's 2 or 3 pretty strong accounts that, at least in the United States, in the Northeast, that rye bread that was infected with that was responsible for a lot of the witch hunt kind of stuff around Salem, Massachusetts.
I don't know if they'll promote that now or not.
I don't know if they'll
Put their ads. Or...
the reason I bring that up is because I've been trying to figure out is, let's say if you were going to make 100% rye whiskey, and you didn't know that your rye was infected, does that affect the whiskey, or does the distillation process kill out that fungus? Or that?
I would think it would.
I think so.
Pretty much kills everything else.
I can't find any references where people say, oh, this person was in the emergency room or something because they drank poisonous ergotamine laced or ergot laced rye whiskey. So
well, I know distilling bourbon, it kept you from getting cholera back in the day, Lexington. So they had 2 cholera epidemics, and the one town drunk.
That's true. Yeah,
he never got it.
Yeah, because the water got basically boiled and killed everything off. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's rye the grain. So that's our first ingredient we're gonna start with.
Yes.
So what do we have stated here?
So we have so a lot of you hear what's called a rye bourbon, and that's a bourbon, so it means it's at least 51% corn, with the rye as the flavoring grain, secondary grain, flavoring grain, kind of more where you get your, you're getting the sweetness of the corn, but you're getting a lot of the flavor from your secondary grains. So a lot of that, this Russell's Reserve is what they would consider kind of a low rye bourbon. So it's 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted barley. Whereas Bullet is, and these are both 10 years old, Bullet is a 68% corn, 28% rye, 4% malted barley. So a whole lot higher rye. Yeah. So
but even though it's higher rye, these are still bourbons.
They are.
So we were kind of talking about that off camera. So there's the 2 branches of bourbon is the wheated bourbons, then you've got rye bourbons, and then you've got just rye whiskey, which can be as low as 51% rye or as high as 100% rye.
It can.
But it's still rye whiskey.
Yeah. So this is you will pour this. So this is your standard 13%, which is about what most of the Buffalo Trace products are. They're in that 12 to 15%.
On the rye.
On the rye, yeah.
So what products out of Buffalo Trace is considered the ryes?
Oh, I mean their bourbons? They have a high rye mash bill and a low rye, but there's only the low rye is 10 to 12% rye bourbon. The high rye is about 15. So there's
not a lot of difference.
No, I think it's more of just their kind of statement that this is a higher rye, recipe. But most people, when they say a high rye bourbon, it's usually at least 20%, rye in the mash bill. So these are 2 very popular, very well known, distilleries.
Or something about wild turkey. It always tastes like wild turkey.
It's a recipe. It's that mash bill. It's the same mash bill for every product.
I guess that's what it is.
Except for the rye.
It just carries through.
Yeah, for all their bourbon, it's the same mash bill.
You can always tell it's just like 101 or something. It's just got that certain flavor to it.
Yeah, their same recipe, for everything but their rye whiskey.
So now, so this is 10 years old. Now this isn't bottled in bond.
Because it's only 9
9
proof.
proof.
Yes.
So now, wonder what would be the decision of not having like a 10-year-old whiskey be bottled in bond? If you're going to wait that long, why not get that extra distinction?
Bottled bond's been kind of a newer thing. Recently, I mean, it's old. I mean, it was established in 1897.
As far as the popularity,
Popularity. I mean, you know, they
kind of the status.
1800s, you know, when it was declared law, and early 1900s, even through Prohibition, medicinal whiskey was bottled in bond. But once bourbon kind of fell out of favor, they started going with lighter whiskeys, lighter bourbons.
Oh, so the proof was lower then.
Yeah, because people were going to gin and vodkas then, and most gin and vodka is 80 proof.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these distilleries started making, you know, 80 to 90 proof bourbon for the longest time.
Compete with that market.
Yeah, and so the bottle and bond, re-emergence of bottle and bond is kind of a newer thing.
Okay.
Plus, you proof this down to 90, you'll get a lot more of it than if you proof it down to 100.
It's a good point. Doesn't sound like a big difference, but it's 10% difference.
Especially considering this is $29.
Yeah. So it's you're selling on volume on that one. So
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Yeah. So here's our bullet bourbon age.
Does it do they have to pay any more taxes, or is there any more like administrative cost to having a bottle and bond?
No.
It doesn't cost the distiller any more to make it bottle and bond as opposed to like make it like this.
No, you're just going to get less out of it. Less product when you water it down. So this one's 28%.
So this one is almost twice as much. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Age the same.
So same age.
Yeah.
Both are bourbons. This one just has twice as much rye in the mash bill.
Only 4% malted barley, so whereas Wild Turkey has 12. The proofs are pretty close.
Yeah.
90 versus 91.2.
Yeah. So
But
pretty much same proof.
You get a little more.
I was gonna say you can definitely tell the flavor pop in this one
A little bit more, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely got more of a pepper. I'm not getting as much mint as I got off. I'm not sure what was in your.
The Old Forester.
Old Forester.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
But that was 67% rye.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, still good. It's if you're a wheated bourbon aficionado, definitely kind of give your palate a few rounds of the rye bourbons, and I think you'll.
Yeah,
at
start
least
with
with
a
me,
lower
kind of,
proof. Start with
yeah.
something a little bit lower, a little bit lighter, in the rye. I mean, like this is going to be, it's not going to have as much, you get a little more pepper and
this
stuff.
honestly is hard to tell the difference between. This tastes like well-aged wild turkey, basically. If you like just wild turkey, regular one-on-one, this tastes basically like, oh, that's a really well-aged wild turkey. I'm not really picking up much rye at all on that. This one you definitely can get the pop out of it.
Yeah, that 15% difference makes a big difference. So, like I said, you're talking about pretty much same proof, same age. Only thing difference in that is that the warehouses,
Is char level the same on both of these?
I think they're pretty similar on that. Yes, the char levels, they're both 3 or 4, so there's not much difference on the char levels. But Wild Turkey has 6-story brick houses they age yours in, and Bullet only has one floor. So there's a little bit of difference with that.
Different.
Yeah, with aging also.
Yeah. But this is definitely one more of their volume.
It is.
Kind of volume.
Like I said, for $29.
Yeah, so you can put this on the middle rack, 3 stories up, and that's going to
This one's going to be double the price. So.
There you go.
Yeah. So. All right.
Yep, they're good. They're good.
We'll take just a quick break here and cleanse the palates, and we'll move on to rye whiskeys.
All right, so let's give kind of the next rung up on the ladder. So we were doing rye-based bourbons before.
Yeah.
Now we're switching up to actual rye whiskey.
Rye whiskeys, and we'll just keep on easing our way up.
All right.
So we started out Russell Reserve 10-year-old. That was 13% rye bourbon. And then we did a 10-year-old bullet, which was 28%. So now we'll move on up the scale a little bit to this is actual rye whiskey. So it's got to be rye's got to be dominant grains. It's got to be at least 51%.
Now, how much corn? What is the mash bill on this? How much corn
This
is
one
it?
is 56% rye, 33% corn, 11% malted barley.
Okay.
So you still gonna get a lot of the corn.
So
in
it's still
there.
got enough corn in there
Mhm.
to flavor it. Give,
Yeah.
give it a sweet, kind of a little sweeter flavor.
Try this. A little bit.
And I was asking Jerry kind of off camera about if you ever noticed, actually on both of these bottles, that rye-based products typically have a green label, even
They
if
usually
the,
do, yeah.
the
Kind of a
rye-based
custom
bourbon.
thing, yeah.
I didn't know if that was a, legal thing, or if that's just sort of just kind of become the standard.
Yeah, it's kind of the standard. Yeah, you see it a lot. Kind of sticks out on the shelf.
Yeah, let you know that it's a rye. So this is from Wilderness
Trail.
Trail in
Yeah.
Danville.
It sure is.
If you haven't been down there, it's a pretty nice distillery. It's kind of more of the high-tech end of distilleries.
And
They're expanding quite a bit down there as well.
a lot. Going from 1 or 2 barrels a day to I think 260 barrels a day now in 7 years. But I consider these two very similar. New Riff is up in northern Kentucky. Very similar in age. These are both going to be like a 4-year-old product. I know they're getting ready to release an 8-year-old
Of the rye.
of their bourbon later this year, and they're getting up to that 7 or 8-year-old range too. So 2 of our favorite kind of, I really wouldn't call them craft distilleries anymore.
No,
I mean,
call them craft anymore.
yeah, but 2 of our favorite distilleries.
Now, there again, like a legal thing, is there a cutoff of how many barrels you make is considered craft?
To be on the Bourbon Trail, there's a cutoff. I don't know exactly what the number of barrels you have in storage is, but yeah, you have to have a certain amount of
But there's
barrels
no
in storage.
minimum like that. If you make less than that, you're considered a craft distillery.
No, not necessarily. This is,
And it's got a nice smell like that. It's got a nice oaky. That's good.
So these are going to be younger. The first 2
Yes,
we had
nice,
the bourbons
nice.
were 10-year-olds, but these are going to be higher proof.
It's definitely got the more of a kick. Again, is that I don't know if that's the proof or I believe it's the proof on this one.
It could be.
Because I'm getting that mostly up front. I'm not getting not as much rye kick as I would expect with that high of a rye.
Well, the first two we did were about 90. The bourbons were about 90
Not a
proof.
proof, yeah.
So now we're kicking it up. This one's 113. So it's got the proof to it. Like I said, just a little bit above what you need to be considered rye whiskey with 56% corn or rye. But a lot of corn in it though.
Yeah, definitely has, and you can taste that. You can taste the corn. Second drink's definitely better. Kind of got my palate a little better. Let's go.
If you see on your glass there, you can see the legs on it.
Oh yeah.
How slowly they're,
You can tell the higher proof just.
Yeah.
When he says legs, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody out there already knows what it is. But in case you don't, is you swirl it around the glass and you hold it up and you kind of see little drip lines. Those drip lines are actually where the alcohol is basically recondensing on the glass, almost. What's the little reflux tube on like a steel, like a column steel? Essentially, that's what you're doing in the glass.
it's good stuff. I mean,
It's good stuff. I like that.
You're talking about now both these.
Which I like most of all of Wilderness Trail stuff. I
do, and these are very similar in price too. You're talking about upper 40s. On both of these, this is a single barrel. This is just a barrel proof, or so.
So is this one considered a small batch?
Yeah, well, no, they're both single barrels.
Oh, they're both
So
single.
they're both single barrel proof.
All right.
So
So very similar.
very similar, like I said, age, proof. This is 113 versus 105.8. Like I said, single barrel proof. So, but the mash bill is going to be the different thing.
All right.
So now, going from 56% rye, we're jumping to a 95.5.
So we're almost doubling the rye.
We're getting up there now. Yeah. So this is, but like I said, the proof is fairly similar. The age is very similar.
Now, is there any particular term for rye whiskey that's 100% rye, or is it just all called rye whiskey?
We just call rye whiskey. Anything 51% or above. As long as it follows the rules of same rules as bourbon.
So there's not like pure rye, or there's nothing to denote that it's 100% rye.
No. So
Don't get quite as bold on the nose on this one. Not getting quite as much. Got a good flavor though. That's nice. Pick out that it's got some kind of different. Or maybe it's just the rye. Maybe it's just the higher rye that I'm picking up. That's a nice flavor. It's almost like it's odd to say. It almost tastes like hay, straw. Kind of getting that. I guess through my nose while I'm tasting it, but in a good way. Not like you wouldn't want it. Normally you wouldn't want to eat hay or straw, but But it's kind of got that almost. Yeah, sort of that kind of an earthy taste to it.
yeah, I mean when I say 95.5, this is 95% rye, 5% malted rye.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So it is actually 100% rye.
100% rye. Yeah.
It's just 5% of it's malted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sure is.
Well, that kind of brings up again the thing I was asking. Like, if it's 100% rye, how does it? Where's the amylase coming from?
Well, you won't see 100% just rye. You'll see 100% malted rye.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Then that answers the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I don't see how you could really make just through the distillation process if you just have 100% rye.
You can actually add enzymes to it. There is enzymes that you can buy and add to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't really
And
affect the flavor or anything like that. But
that's not considered a flavoring agent. And
No.
It's not considered any kind of color or additive.
No.
Because it's a natural part of the process to begin with.
Yes.
And there's actually, I forget who we talked to that said they do that.
Well, there's a few different
One
places.
of the people that we interviewed said that they add some enzyme to it to kind of kick it up. In fact, I think maybe David said that.
At Clean's Creek.
I think so.
Yeah, there's a few different places that can do that. So, what are you thinking?
I like it. I'll give a plug for both whiskeys. Both of them are really good. I like the nose on this a little better. I like the flavor of this one a little bit better.
So you think it's the corn on the nose?
I think so. I think the corn is giving me a little more of a, I guess it's reminding me more of a bourbon, whereas this one is not as, not picking up as much. Almost get like an oatmeal bland, more of a bland nose to it than in comparison, but the flavor profile is better. Yeah, it's definitely very smooth. Gives you that nice little pop, but not overwhelming in the middle. And the proof, even though it's this
105.8. Yeah.
105, it's similar proof. It's not giving me as much burn on the front, the alcohol burn on the front.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I mean, if you like a high rye bourbon, try some rye whiskeys. I mean, maybe you want to start out with this one, Wilderness Trail, which is just a little bit of rye, higher rye, 50-some% rye, and then a lot of corn, and then graduate maybe up to that one.
Yeah, and allow yourself to kind of push yourself just a little bit. Because at first I wasn't a big fan either. I was like, I'm not crazy about that. But the more I tried it, you really get used to accustomed to those more bold flavors, and then even especially if you then go back to a wheated, it's still nice, but it's not. It doesn't have. Again, I kind of compare it to if you like drinking Guinness beer versus an IPA. The Guinness is still going to be nice Guinness, but it's not going to have that kind of pop that with the hops and things. So this is going to be a little bit more of a bolder experience than especially your wheated bourbons. And then now, especially when you step up to this rye, you're definitely getting more of a bold, open flavor to it. So.
All right. So we're going to move on up to the next step.
We are, but before we do that, I want to give another plug out to Jerry. Jerry was recently featured in Keeneland magazine, so this is the summer 2022 edition. So if you see these around the newsstand, pick it up. I think there's about a 7 or 8 page write-up about Jerry and his Stone Fences Tour success story.
It's filler. It's filler.
I wouldn't say filler. I would say it's an American success story. So if you see this one on the newsstand, pick it up. Jerry's in there. So we'll switch out the bottles and be right back. All right, so we've changed out bottles and we have stepped up to the top rung of the rye ladder.
What, 13% rye, 28% rye, 56% rye.
And we switched from rye bourbons to
rye whiskey.
Rye whiskey.
Yep.
To
When
rye.
we did the 56% Wilderness Trail, then we did a 95.5 rye. Well, these two guys, 100%.
And I've never tried either of these. So
Malted
this is
rye.
a new experience for me.
100% malted rye. So you're talking about the enzymes in barley.
Right.
Yeah, there's not as much of that in rye.
In rye. So
Yeah.
so your production isn't as good. So for
Mm-hmm.
pound for pound, so if you have 100 pounds of malted barley or 100 pounds of malted rye, you're probably going to be able to make more whiskey out of that 100 pounds of malted barley.
So do you think the malted rye here, you get more yield when it's 100% malted rye compared to a 95% rye, 5% malted rye?
Well, just based on the fact that barley is typically where you get your enzymes. Now, without adding enzymes, I guess that's the caveat.
Yeah.
If you go with just the grain itself, just malted barley, malted rye, I think you're going to get more yield out of
You will, yeah.
malted barley.
You sure will.
Probably 2 to 1, I would say.
But this is more about flavor now.
Yeah,
we're getting into.
yeah. This is more definitely about flavor.
Yeah.
So.
So these are very similar. Like I said, these are kind of two craft distilleries in northern Kentucky. So
New Riff is in,
Newport,
I was going to say Fort Thomas, but it's in
Newport,
Yeah.
and
And then Maysville, Old Maysville, of course, is in.
it's a Maysville.
It's
Yeah,
in Maysville.
It's the old Pope distillery. So they're both, both of these are very similar, 100 proof.
Now, Old Pogue is kind of an old family brand.
It is.
New Riff is, as
It's
the
a
name would say, it's
new riff on the tradition.
Yeah.
Like I said, we had them just before on the 95.5, so this is actually a 6-year. So this is going to be a little bit older. You like that 4-year 95.5.
Yeah.
So this is actually a 6-year.
Now,
Malted
is this with rye? You sometimes will see the term chill filtered, non-chill filtered, like in bourbons.
Mm-hmm.
Does the same apply to rye? Is that process the same?
Same. And this is without chill filtration. If you can read the little
I
engraved
couldn't
writing
see
on
that.
there,
Okay.
yeah, it sure is.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of the non-chill filtered bourbons or whiskeys. Either one, I feel like that just kind of gives it more flavor. It's a little more of a slick mouthfeel, a little more of an oily mouthfeel, which I actually enjoy. But mostly it's the flavor. I think the flavor is better on the non-chill filter.
And you know the reason they chill filter.
Probably. So I can remember a story, something about they were trying to make it all the same or something. I don't know. Tell me.
Chill filtering, it takes out the haze in a bourbon.
When it gets
if it's a high proof bourbon,
That's
if you
right.
stick an ice in it, it will get a haze if it's not been chill
And when,
filtered.
as I recall the story, people like Jerry was saying before bourbon, when bourbon kind of lost its cool back in probably the 70s, when everybody was James Bond and we're drinking martinis and using vodkas and gins. If you drink bourbon, you were kind of old man's drink. Second of all, people got used to the nice crystal clear looking drinks, and you drop that ice cube in there, and now all of a sudden it's hazy. It's not even clear anymore. It's like it's milky. So that kind of
A lot of them went to the low proofs. I mean, like I said, they're low proof because of that, and then you don't have to really chill filter a low proof. But when you start getting into high proofs, you need the chill filter to take out that haze. So, check the noses out on these when you're talking about 100%
that's
malted
nice.
rye. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I actually have one of these ordered. I gotta go pick it up. It's a 100%. It's a malted rye, finished in a sherry cask.
Ooh, that's probably
They just
better.
they just released it.
That's
Yeah.
even better, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so-
this is a nice nose on it.
yeah.
Wow, that's really nice. So now this is 100 proof, 6 years old,
Yeah. 100% malted rye.
but again, not bottled and bond.
No.
Not considered bottled and bond.
Mm-mm. Well, actually, yes, it is. You gotta remember, it's 100 proof.
Well, that's what but most of the time you'll see it says bottled and bond.
It says right here. In their bottles, it's hard to
Okay.
see.
I couldn't say. Right there you
Yeah.
go, bottled and bond. So
Yeah.
it is bottled and bond.
Yeah. So anything over 4 years old,
Yeah.
it's 100
100
proof. Distilled at one distillery
Is it-
and one
I was
distilling
gonna say,
season.
is it automatically given that title?
If it's distilled in one distillery
in one
distilling season. There's 2 seasons a year. So January through June is 1. July through December is 2. It's got to be, distilled in one of those seasons by one distillery, and it's got to be at least 4 years old. So this is 6 years old. It's got to be at 100 proof. Aged in a federally bonded warehouses. That's not as much anymore, and there's no tax man sitting there with a key.
Well, yeah.
But it is.
Because in fact, even if you go like to Buffalo Trace, that little entry visitor thing they're doing now, they're converting it. That used to be like what do they call it? It was like a little tax loop warehouse where they could put whiskey in there and people could, I guess, drink it without being taxed.
Well, yeah. I mean, back then, it was your taxman had a key and your distiller had a key. They both had to have the key at the same time to get into a rick house.
To inspect, so they
Yes.
could come and inspect and they could make sure the taxes were correct.
So, what do you think of this one?
I really like that. That's a nice one. That one's got good nose and good flavor. And surprisingly, it's not as hot and peppery as you would expect with 100%. I mean, it's actually very smooth.
Like I said, this is 6-year-old.
No, that's a nice one. That's nice. So what kind of price point looking on?
This one you're talking about 60s now when you're getting into
Okay,
this.
so you get a little nicer.
Yeah,
a
so
little nicer with
the rye whiskeys we had before was in the 50s, 50 some bucks. So we're going from 25 to 30 bucks up to 50 up to 60 some dollars.
Well, you can tell by the flavor.
You can. You sure can.
No, that one. I don't know. I'll start to say I wouldn't say it's twice as good as the starters, but it probably is. I would say if I had to rank them.
Flavor-wise, yes.
Flavor-wise, I would say twice as good. So you're looking at basically twice the price, a little over twice the price, but you're getting twice the nice flavor out of
But all the proofs have been 100 or more.
Right.
Everything we've tasted.
Yeah. So if
the last 4, yeah.
Yeah. So if your goal is to basically just consume alcohol, stick with the cheap stuff. If your goal is to actually enjoy something nice and have some good flavor and something you can sip on, this is definitely worth it. It's good. I like that.
All right. So we'll switch over to Maysville Club.
So let's do a little
Give me
bit.
just 1 second
All
here.
right. Hold on.
I think somebody's tapped
Do a
dancing
little
in there.
switching here.
Max, come on, buddy. All right, buddy. Yeah, that's good stuff up there.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Now let's cut that part out. All right, 1, 2, 3. All right, so Jerry did some off camera.
How let the dog out.
And so now we're going to switch off from the new riff to the old Maysville. On the bottle it says established in 1876. Has it been continuously run since then?
No, this is a cool distillery. I mean, I love this one, but it's modern.
It's modern.
It's very modern, make a great product. This one is kind of historic family, the Pogue family. 5 generations.
Now, where are they from? Pogue, is that
It's a
Irish?
Maysville. I'm not for sure exactly what their heritage are. I know the first two Pogues were killed at the distillery.
Oh, really?
So they have a kind of a tragic past. So the third one, actually during Prohibition, he was like, well, I'm not going to start it back afterwards. So
That was a cursed story.
it's a cursed distillery. But they bought it, I think it's the 5th and 6th generation now.
Oh,
they brought it back.
Brought it back.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's very small. It's right there sitting on the river, right above where the distillery would have been. But they actually have the old house that the Pogues owned back in the day. They were able to buy that back. So they operate the distillery out of the garage.
This is made in a garage?
Pretty much, yes.
That's impressive, yeah. What's a different nose in it?
Mm-hmm. Very different,
You're getting
yeah.
a lot of plum and grape kind of.
A lot of, like some kind of
almost
stone fruit.
almost like a fig or something.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah, or
Very different than the new riff
Very,
raff.
very different.
Yeah.
Yes, that's almost. It's definitely a fruity, raisin, plum.
Not what you expect out of a rye.
Maybe even like a dry. If you're small, those dried peaches that you get. The freeze dried peach things. No, not at all what I was expecting.
Out of a rye, no. It's
Wow,
actually a little younger than this. It's the same proof, 100 proof, 4 years old.
Has a whole lot of like raisin and 3. So yeah, this one is not at all what I expected when I picked up the glass, especially compared to this one's 95.5, right?
Well, these are 100%.
These are both 100% malted,
yeah.
malted rye.
Malted rye, yeah.
It's amazing.
This
how
is
they can
actually
be-
6. This is actually a little younger. It's 4.
Yeah, so this one, the old Maysville Club by the Pogue family, which off camera they were looking at, that's a Scottish name, so that kind of makes sense that, with the distilling. Is amazingly, like I said, figgy, like apricots. That's what I was trying to think of, apricots.
Very kind of a fruity
fruity.
smell to it compared to New Riff, which is awesome, like smell of like mints and kind of an herbal smell. I mean,
So the new riff is like what you think of as a really nice tasting rye.
Mhm.
It's a very, very good, very good taste. This is a very unexpected, but it's very delicious.
yeah.
Even the aftertaste on that has that,
It's a
like
it's
a
very.
like you ate an apricot or a dried apple or something.
Mhm. Yeah.
Interesting.
And
Especially
it's rye. I mean, it's like
especially the fact that both of them are 100% rye.
It's 100% of this malted. You know.
That's something. They have some magic sauce of some kind.
I mean, that's one of my favorite. When you talk about rye whiskey, this is one of my. I enjoy both of these though. Actually, I think both of these, both Northern Kentucky. I lived up there for a while. Kind of fond of Northern Kentucky distilleries. A lot up there. I mean, you can, between Oak Pogue to New Riff to Boone County Distilling to the guys there at in Ludlow and Second Spear.
Not sure where Ludlow is.
It's just west of Covington on the river.
Is that around Warsaw?
No, it's not that far.
Not that far.
Just right. I mean, it's pretty much joins
Oh, okay.
Covington. So Second Sight Spirits. They have, which is very cool. It has like a genie as a steel, and then you go on out to Sparta and get the Neelys.
Yeah,
It
Neely's.
has all that 11 generations
Yeah, the Neely's I was trying to think of.
of moonshining.
Yeah.
So you got that. Then you got in Augusta you got Baker Bird Winery, which is producing bourbon now, and you've got a Augusta Distillery coming here soon. So I mean, it's just a lot. There's actually one in Covington that's coming. So I mean, it's I'm fond of. These are probably my 2 favorite ones up there.
Now, is this an old recipe? Is this, since it's an old family, is this like an original recipe?
This is something they've that's from the Old Pogue.
So this is
wine,
kind
yes.
of in the old line.
Yeah. And this is it's small, very small, hard to get up the hill to get to it or down the hill. I mean, it's on a hillside overlooking where the distillery was there on the Ohio River. So
It's got that, which that's kind of one of my favorite things to do with if it's a drink that I enjoy is I wait till it's done, I let the glass kind of dry and then smell it. It's got a really nice flavor after it's, because what happens is basically all the alcohol essentially evaporates off and all you're left with is then just what's left behind, which is all the flavors.
Yeah. So I mean that's rye. This grain there. There's a lot of stuff you can get out of this.
A lot you can get out of that little
Yeah, it sure is. Sure is. I mean, like I said, it's in bourbon, it's a secondary grain or flavoring grain. But when you put it as the lead character in a whiskey,
And
it's got a lot of flavor to
again,
it.
since we're kind of a little bit about history on this, or a whole lot about history, this actually predates bourbon in the United States. So this is kind of, I guess, the father of bourbon.
It is. So don't shy away from it. I mean, like I said, you'll find something that once you kind of maybe work your way up to it. I mean, if you're like, rye is a little too hot, a little too spicy.
It's definitely a bold. I'll give you that. It's definitely a bolder flavor, but don't be scared of it. It's it takes a little getting accustomed to, but once you do, it's almost like you don't want to go back. It's got a little.
It's tough. It's tough. So enjoy. I mean, this, like I said, this is one grain that we've been talking about. There's, like I said, with whiskeys, you can have all different kinds of other grains. I mean, like I said, just with bourbon, you can have 51% corn, but Other grains could be anything.
Can be a multitude of grains.
Could be
Speaking of that,
yeah.
what are we doing in the next episode on?
Well, actually, we'll go back and we'll talk a little wheat.
Wheat, okay?
A little wheat whiskey for your wheat whiskey fans, your Maker's Mark fans, your Weller fans.
Is there any whiskey that's just 100% wheat?
There is. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
well,
there is.
We'll cover that. So make sure to watch the next episode, and we'll keep going through the grains, and we're going to take you through several grains. Maybe not all. Actually, we might go through all of them. I don't know.
We'll go through some different grains, not just. We'll eventually get to corn. What's that for last? But we'll talk about all the different ones that you can use, and it may not be just rye. It may not be just barley
there's some
or wheat.
a little more exotic ones.
There are some exotic grains that are used in bourbon that we can talk about. So
all right, keep watching.
Drinking dog whiskey, telling white lies.